Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 266, The Sealing of the 144,000, Part 2. The podcast objectives are reveal the identity of the 144,000, reveal the two great sins all men must avoid, analyze the great temptation all men must overcome, and analyze the manner in which death has plagued this life. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. The identity of the 144,000. Now, we concluded the most recent podcast with a powerful revelation concerning the 144,000 male descendants of Jacob who are sealed in Revelation 7. These same 144,000 male descendants are later referenced in Revelation 14. Revelation 14, 1 through 5 reads, "And I looked and saw a Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written upon their foreheads. They are those who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. They are those following the Lamb wherever he leads them on. They were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to Elohim and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no falsehood, for they are blameless before the throne of Elohim." Now look, this brings us to the revelation I shared in the most recent podcast concerning these 144,000. The 144,000 who are sealed in Revelation 7 are not virgins in the traditional sense. They are not men who were handpicked to obtain the seal of Elohim for the simple fact that they had never been married. Although many Bibles read this way, this is not the true interpretation of the scripture. This truth led us to ask the question, who are the 144,000 who are sealed in Revelation 7? And why do most Bibles refer to them as virgins? Now, in order to arrive at the answer, we must first rightly divide this word of truth. Upon doing so, we will arrive at the true interpretation of Revelation 14 and the identity of the 144,000. Let's get started. Now, in beginning to rightly divide this word of truth, we must move beyond the text to understand the origins of the words used in this passage. As is my custom, I turned to the ABP, and in doing so, I made multiple discoveries. First and foremost, the word defiled in Revelation 14:4 is more appropriately translated as tainted. In effect, Revelation 14:4 should read as, These are those who were not tainted with women. From there, I looked closer at the word tainted, and I arrived at the following definition from Strong's Hebrew and Greek dictionaries, G3435. Now, by definition, to taint is to pollute, stain, to defile, to contaminate morally, a descriptor for those who have not kept themselves pure from the defilements of sin, who have soiled themselves by fornication and adultery. In line with this definition, we see that defilement, although largely deriving from fornication and adultery, extends to include any manner of sin. And yet, there is a clear emphasis on sexual defilement. For Revelation 14:4 reads, "They were not defiled with women." Setting that matter aside for a while, we can harden our conclusion of a universal model of defilement by considering the next word in this verse. To wit, Revelation 14:4 reads, saying, "For they," the 144,000, "are virgins." Returning to the ABP, we find the word virgin derives from Strong's Hebrew and Greek dictionaries, G3933. This definition confirms a virgin is a maiden suitable for marriage, having had no prior sexual relationship with any man. Although this is the most common application of the word virgin, i.e., the feminine class, it is not the application found in Revelation 14:4. Lo, here lies the inflection and another critical revelation concerning the 144,000. Consider it carefully, and as you are led, do share it with others, for what I am about to reveal is an uncommon truth. Here is the revelation. The application of the word virgin in Revelation 14:4 is the masculine classification. And this is the only verse in the scriptures that uses the word virgin employing the masculine classification. This truth brings us to the question, what is the masculine classification of the word virgin? By definition, a virgin, per the masculine classification, is a man who has abstained from all uncleanness and whoredom attendant on idolatry, and so has kept his chastity. It is also one who has never had a physical relationship with women. Now, we have already proven that the 144,000 are not virgins in the physical sense, and that they are unmarried men, under the premise that it is the Father's will for men to marry and to become one flesh with their wives. And this is from the beginning. And thus, we conclude by the Spirit, the 144,000 in Revelation 7 and 14 align with the former rendering of the masculine classification. This brings us to the certain interpretation of this critical matter. The 144,000 are men who have abstained from all uncleanness and have not made any idols for themselves. That is, anything in their life higher than Elohim. Moreover, since the 144,000 are the spiritual standard for all who will obtain the seal of Elohim, the same rule applies to the rest. Thus, we declare these set apart ones who will be sealed in this season have made Elohim their treasure and have resisted all manner of defilement. By all means, avoid these two sins. Now, before I move on, I want to address the reason why there is an emphasis on the fact that the 144,000 were not defiled with women. That is to ask, why does Revelation 14:4 read, "They are those who were not defiled with women," if the intent is that these are undefiled universally? It's because the sins of fornication and adultery are two of the most insidious and pervasive of all sins for all time, but especially in these last days. I could use the scriptures to prove this point, but I am not being led to do so, at least not in the way that I tend to break down scriptures to validate a point. However, I do want you to consider one of the examples Yahushua Messiah uses in his evaluation of the law of Moses and the Torah of perfection. Matthew 5:27-30 reads, "You heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone looking at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out and throw it away from you. For it is better for you that one of your members perish than for your entire body to be thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away from you. For it is better for you that one of your members perish than for your entire body to be thrown into Gehenna." First of all, we should appreciate the gravity of this passage concerning the sins of adultery and fornication. To wit, Yahushua Messiah is telling the multitudes of generations past and generations present that we must, by all means, avoid these two sins. He goes as far as to command us to cut off our hands, my brothers, if our hands cause us to stumble in performing physical acts that are contrary to his will of chastity. For we are better off entering into everlasting life without a hand that offends than to be cast into endless death. Likewise, he commands us to pluck out our eyes, my brothers, if our eye causes us to stumble in lusting after women. For we are better off entering into everlasting life without an eye that offends than to be cast into endless death. Now, here again, these are very drastic measures, and yet Yahushua Messiah went there. He didn't hold back because it was and is an uncomfortable topic some would prefer not to discuss. On the contrary, he addressed it because he knew what was in man. And he knew that if his disciples did not get the victory over lust, they would all become adulterers in some capacity. Here is why. If you think about anything long enough, you are eventually going to do it. All you need is an opportunity. And trust me, the enemy will eventually present you with that opportunity. And you will act in accordance with the lust which has entered in through your eyes and is now breeding sinful intentions within your heart. Lo, as you would expect, this defective process is validated by the scriptures. James 1:12-16 reads, "Blessed is the man who does endure temptation, for when he has been proved, he shall receive the crown of life, which the master has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is enticed, I am enticed by Elohim. For Elohim is not enticed by evil matters, and he entices no one. But each one is enticed when he is drawn away by his own lust, entrapped. Then, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it has been accomplished, brings forth death. Do not go astray, my beloved brothers." We position ourselves to overcome them all. Now, the summation of this disastrous cycle is sure, and I have captured it in the graphic to the right. It begins with temptation, that is, the event of a test or a trial in which we are evaluated to determine our levels of mastery of the Father's will. If we endure the temptation by resisting the lust that comes by way of temptation, we will prove our love for the Father. And in the end, he will give us a crown of life. On the other hand, if we fail to endure temptation by resisting lust, we will progress to the focal stage of enticement. This is where things will begin to get off track. Here is why. The model of enticements referenced in James 1 is a spiritual probe to determine what is in your heart. Here lies the problem and why things will almost always get off track when you yield to temptation and give way to lust. It's because the heart is desperately wicked. Therefore, when lust progresses to the phase of enticement, it will activate any evil within your heart that corresponds to the original temptation. Like a magnet, it will attract anything within your heart that has similar debased qualities, and it will lead you to the doorstep of sin. Now, this development is confirmed by James 1 and the graphic to the right. For it is written, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. In other words, when lust attracts the uncleanness within your heart, it leads you to the doorstep of sin. At that point, it's just a matter of time and opportunity. And once the opportunity presents itself, the time will come and you will sin. It is inevitable. It is unavoidable. That is, if you don't stop this process in the beginning. If you don't, the scriptures tell us plainly, sin, when it has been accomplished, i.e., finished, brings forth death. Here lies the inflection and why Revelation 14 specifically calls out defilement via adultery and fornication when referencing the spiritual quality of the 144,000 who are sealed. It is for the following reason. Of all the temptations plaguing men, the most difficult of all, per the mean average, is the temptation to engage in some unlawful physical act involving a woman. That is to say, once a man begins lusting after a woman and is enticed, resisting sin at this juncture is like catching your clothes on fire and not getting singed. Proverbs 6:27 through 33 reads, would a man take fire to his bosom and his garments not be burned? Would a man walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her goes unpunished. He who commits adultery with a woman lacks heart. He who does it destroys his own soul. He finds smiting and shame, and his reproach is not wiped away. Enoch 10:18 through 20 reads, destroy all the souls addicted to the alliance. Let every oppressor perish from the face of the earth. Let every evil work be destroyed. Now, the passage in Enoch reaffirms my position concerning the difficulty involved in avoiding sexual immorality once lust has been conceived. Enoch 10 clearly reads, destroy all souls addicted to the alliance, i.e., fornication. My dear friends, there were many sins that caused Elohim to destroy the earth with a flood. And yet, none of these sins were scripturally denoted by an addiction outside of the alliance. It is a sore evil. Alas, this is why Revelation 14 explicitly calls out uncleanness as it pertains to unlawful physical relationships with women. In many ways, for us men, if we can overcome this manner of temptation, we position ourselves to overcome them all. Death is the way of life. Now, in saying that, allow me to be very clear. I am not suggesting that all men are tempted by the alliance. I am simply revealing why Revelation 14 specifically calls out this sin when it speaks to the undefiled nature of the 144,000 who were sealed. That being said, all sin is sin, and thus we are not trying to create a false scale magnifying the lust of the eye. That would be dishonest and unhelpful. Notwithstanding, you must appreciate how our quest for holiness, perfection, and everlasting life is centered on fighting a good fight, suffering hardship on behalf of our Master, and keeping ourselves from becoming entangled with the cares of this life. 1 Timothy 6:11 through 12 reads, but you, O man of Elohim, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, meekness. Fight the good fight of faith. Lay hold on to everlasting life, to which you were also called, and have confessed the good confession before many witnesses. 2 Timothy 2:3 through 4 reads, suffer hardship with us as a good soldier of Yahushua Messiah. No one serving as a soldier entangles himself in the affairs of this life in order to please only him who enlisted him as a soldier. Lo, all these commands are powerful, and we must heed them all if we are to obtain the seal of Elohim. And yet, I would call special attention to the warning against becoming entangled with the affairs of this life. Here is why. One who becomes entangled in the affairs of this life exponentially decreases their prospects of spiritual success. For look, one who has become entangled opens the door for the enemy to create and or strengthen a spiritual stronghold. And from this stronghold, they will manufacture a powerful addiction which serves only to harden the stronghold. Alas, this is the life of the perishing. They are perishing while they are yet living, and they will perish when they die. Lo, this is why I label the diagram to the right as a cycle and not merely a process. Alas, not every sin results in immediate death. Some do, but some don't. This is how entanglement occurs. To wit, at the completion of the cycle, one experiences death in multiple facets of their being, namely their will. Look here, this is how addictions occur. After every cycle of temptation, the will of the individual becomes weaker. Their resistance gradually decreases. Thus, temptations are more frequent. Lust becomes stronger and more violent. Enticement becomes an everyday way of life. Sin becomes more prevalent, and eventually it begins to reign. And the one who is caught up in this disastrous cycle will perish even as they live. And then, in the end, and after all, they will surely die. Not a happy ending, is it? And yet, it is a testament to the fact that how you start the race and how you run it will go a long way in determining if you finish. Knowing then and seeing how we draw nigh unto the end, and the tracks are full and used to run, I caution you to give the more earnest heed to how you run. And do not get caught up in the cares of this world, for death is the way of life, and sin as we know it. And evasion should be the goal of everyone. Now, here is the final word. Oh, be careful, my eyes, what you see, for a tempting sight could be the end of me. I would advise you to get in the habit of praying this line, for the eye has a propensity for lust, and lust, as you have seen, is on the pathway to death. Therefore, I will resist temptation. I will rebuke lust. I will vanquish enticement, though she cries. I will give no place to sin. I will turn away from death, and I will set no evil thing before my eyes. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 266, The Sealing of the 144,000, Part 2. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 267, The Sealing of the 144,000, Part 3. I will post this podcast on Monday, April 1st, 2024. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.